50 books, 50 new releases for spring. This is insane. 2024 is on steroids. At least when it comes to new book releases. Some of these books I am anticipating. Some of these books are only on my list because I know that they are part of insanely famous series, and I just wanted to put the info out there for people who are interested in these books. And also for some of these books, it was the cover. I'm not gonna lie, I am shallow like that. It was the cover that really grabbed me and want to make me read this book. Just simply, like, that's how it is. Now, am I going to read 50 books in the upcoming 3 months? No. No. But am I going to try? Yes. I am going to try because we like failure on this channel, and when the expectations are low, that's when I thrive. Okay, jokes aside, honestly, there are fantastic books coming out, and it's all my favorite genres. We have fantasy, we have sci-fi. And I don't know when was the last time when I was excited about a sci-fi new release, and now I suddenly have, I don't know, at least 5 on this list. Besides that, we have literary fiction, we have historical fiction, we have romance, we have thrillers, mysteries, horrors, graphic novels. You name it, I probably have it on this list, so you will find at least one book on this list that you're interested in. So without any further ado, let's just get to the list. But before we do that, hey, hello, hi, how are you all doing? My name is Zsuzsi. I am the petite reader and I make weekly bookish videos. And if this is something that sounds interesting to you and you like any of my other videos, then I think that you should definitely subscribe to my channel. You are welcome here. And now, back to the list. The very first book that I want to talk about, or I want to mention, is The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black, and this is a book that's coming out on March 5th. Now, just in case if you don't know, and I don't know why you wouldn't know unless you live under a rock, what book this is. I mean, I'm saying that and I only read The Cruel Prince like in the first 2 weeks of January, so this is a hashtag hypocrite moment. This book is a fantasy book, and this book is the second book in the spin-off series following the events in the Folk of Air or in the Cruel Prince trilogy, if you will. And oh my god, that trilogy is one of my favorite fantasy series of all times. What Holly Black did there, all the wicked games, the court intrigues, the manipulation, the fake relationships, oh my god, I love it. I love it all. I don't know what it says about me, but I love it. And the first book in this series, that really got me. Really got me, and I cannot wait to continue with the second book. And the next new release is What Monstrous Gods by Rosamund Hodge. This is also coming out on March 5th, and she is the author of Cruel Beauty. That was another fantasy standalone, just like this is a fantasy standalone book, and honestly, I really like that book. But what got me when it comes to this particular book is definitely the artwork. I mean, can we look at that artwork? Yeah, I want to read this book. So centuries ago, a sorcerer named Reuven raised a deadly briar around the kingdom and put the royal family to sleep. And years later, Leah's destiny is to kill Reuven, this sorcerer, and also to wake the royal family from their dreaming. And Leah succeeds. She kills Reuven, who, by the way, starts haunting her, and also she wakes up the royal family and then gets engaged to the prince. But her troubles are not over because her mother-in-law, soon-to-be mother-in-law, the queen, decides that they need to go on a pilgrimage, Leah and the prince, and they need to find the gods. They need to wake the gods. But it turns out that the gods are not exactly what they seem, and they are actually pretty dangerous. So now Leah needs Reuven's help for survival. And the next book is Murder Road by Simone St. James, and this is also coming out on March 5th. And this book is a paranormal thriller slash horror book. April and Eddie, they are a young married couple, and they are going to this small town resort to spend their honeymoon there. But on the way there, they actually see a hitchhiker on the road, and the hitchhiker seems to be in distress. So they pick up the hitchhiker, and when that hitchhiker is in their car, they realize that, oh, that person is bleeding. And it's not enough that person is bleeding, there is also a truck that seems to be following them. So they take the hitchhiker to a hospital, and unfortunately, the person dies. And then the police tells them that, this is very interesting because there have been these suspicious murders happening on that lane where you actually picked up this hitchhiker, but we don't have any lead. But now we have witnesses, and you know what? Maybe also you are the suspects now. So April and Eddie freak out, understandably, and they decide to try to find the actual murder. But it seems that something is a little bit off. There's something paranormal in this story. And the next book that I'm interested in is also coming out on March 5th. There are a lot of books coming out on March 5th, okay? But this is Anita De Monte Loves Last. And this book is from the same author who wrote Olga Dies Dreaming. This is a literary fiction book. In this book we have dual timeline. One of them is in the 1980s, and we follow Anita De Monte, who is a rising star in the art world in New York City. Usually the author's novels, they take place in New York City. And then we jump in time, and then we start following Raquel, who is studying art. And Raquel is a student of color, and she doesn't really find her place in New York and New York high society until she meets an older student, and then she starts, climbing the social ladder. And then she stumbles upon the story of Anita. And the next book is Finlay Donovan Rolls the Dice by Al Cosimano. This is again coming out on March 5th. And look, I never read the books in this mystery series. Now this is the 4th book in this humorous mystery series, and I know that people had a really good opinion about the first book, and then people don't really like the 2nd and the 3rd book. So I don't know how I feel about this book, but I just wanted to put it out there to any of you who actually read this series. And now I guess it's a useful information to know that the 4th book is coming out on March 5th. And then there is another thriller slash horror book coming out on March 5th that I am super interested in, and this is The New Couple in 5B by Lisa Unger. I believe that's how you pronounce the author's name. And this book really reminds me of Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, and that was one of the books of Riley Sager that I really liked. We are following Rosie and Chad, and they are a couple, but they are really struggling, surviving basically in New York City, and everything changes when Chad's uncle dies, and he leaves them this amazing apartment in an amazing building in an amazing neighborhood in New York City. So they obviously take the opportunity and they move into this apartment. But as they settle in, Rosie realizes that something is just off because the building is so weird, the doorman is weird, there are cameras everywhere, there have been a lot of murders happening in the building, and when one of their neighbors die, then our story begins. And then the next book is The Extinction of Irina Ray. This is also something that's coming out on March 5th, and this is a literary fiction novel that is a debut. And this is published by an author who herself is a translator. In this book, 8 translators are invited to a house in a Polish forest that belongs to Irina Ray. And they are there because she wants them to translate her magnum opus that she is working on. And then she suddenly disappears. And the translators begin to investigate. It's not that they have to investigate, but they begin to investigate. And then there are all these secrets that are coming to the surface about Irina. And also, like, you know, this is a secluded location and 8 total strangers I logged into a small space. So they also become a little bit paranoid, and they also have to face their own differences. And I am guessing that these are cultural differences. I am looking forward to reading this book. And the next book is The Hearing Test by Eliza Berry Callahan. And this is also coming out on March 5th. And this is again a literary fiction book that is a debut. This book is about a very young woman who need to change the way of her living, who need to reorient the relationship that she has with the world and with people in her life in the wake of sudden deafness. And the Goodreads description said, and this is what really grabbed me, that this novel is a book on silence and a book on seeing. And the next book is a romance book, a contemporary romance book, Guilt Trip, that is coming out on March 5th. And I picked up this book because of Scotland, because as you can tell from the title, this book takes place in Scotland. And if you've never been to Scotland, you have to go to Scotland. And if you've never been to the Scottish Highlands, because that's what this book is about, then you gotta go to the Scottish Highlands. Like, why would you miss out on this? And this? And this? I mean, you gotta go to Scotland. Our female protagonist in this book is Eddie. And Eddie is a travel consultant, and she loves traveling all over the world, but she never goes to Scotland because she has some kind of personal connection or personal tragedy that is connected to Scotland. But her boss sends her to Scotland anyways because there is a family-run tour company in the Scottish Highlands that needs her help. So she packs her bags and she goes to Scotland, and there she meets Logan, who is our resident grump in the story, and he definitely doesn't want an American, you know, telling them how to run their Scottish business. And as they wage a war, so this is definitely gonna be an enemies to lovers kind of situation, Logan will help Eddie reconnect with her past. And the next book on my list is A Touch of Chaos by Scarlett St. Clair. And this is a very famous fantasy romance that is following Hades and Persephone, and I think that this is the 4th book in the series. I have not read any of these books, but again, I know that they are very, very, very famous books, so I just wanted to put it out there. If you are interested in this book, then please mark the date. It's coming out on March 12th because I forgot to tell you the date. And also on March 12th, Sunbringer is coming out. This is the 2nd book in the Godkiller duology or trilogy, because I think now that this is gonna be a trilogy. I heard nothing but only good things about Godkiller, and I am hoping that Sunbringer will be able to live up to the expectations. So if you are interested in this book, March 12th. And there is another sequel that is coming out on March 12th, and this is The Empire of the Damned by Jake Kristoff. This is the 2nd book in that very dark horror vampire fantasy that started with the 1st book, Empire of the Vampire, and the sequel is coming out on March 12th. And we have our first sci-fi on the list that I am super interested in. And this is again coming out on March 12th. This is Jump Notes. And this book is not a new release. This is a translated fiction, and this was released in 2021, and the English version is coming out 2024, March 12th. And this sci-fi book sounds so good. So in this book, the world is divided into the Pacific League of Nations, I'm just gonna call it the Pacific Nations, as well as the Atlantic Nations. And these nations don't really get along very well, and they are definitely not prepared for a third presence aliens who have been on Earth apparently for like years, and they are about to make a reappearance. And this very intelligent alien race has been sending messages to the humans, and there are 3 scientists in the Pacific nations who are desperate to make connection with this alien race because they don't believe that they are hostile, while the Atlantic nations apparently believe that they are hostile, and we will just follow these 3 scientists making first contact with these aliens. And the next book is How to Bury Your Husband. This is coming out on March 14th. And this book is described as a fiction book, a feminist fiction book that is kinda on the humorous comedy side. I cannot imagine that just yet, because actually this book discusses a very dark and significant topic, and that is domestic abuse. Sally, our main female protagonist, she kills her super abusive husband with a cast iron skillet, and she doesn't want to go to jail because she doesn't want to lose her kids, so she just decides to get rid of the body. And then soon Sally finds herself as kind of a leader of a self-help group of 4 women who also have insanely abusive husbands and they need Sally's help to get rid of the body. So, and the next book that I am so interested in is The Floating Hotel by Grace Curtis, and this is coming out on March 19th. And this book is described as a cozy sci-fi. Okay, okay, I'm hooked. I'm interested, and the description and the cover and everything of this novel, and this is a debut by the way, this reminds me of the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers, and that series is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, sci-fi series. If you haven't read it yet, please read it. You're not going to regret it. And this book is about a floating hotel, Grand Abiona, I believe, and this hotel takes the guests all around in the galaxy from planet to planet, and it's got everything. Very comfortable rooms, beautiful view, the greatest food, like everything. This is true luxury in space. And the manager or the caretaker of this hotel is Carl, who is absolutely in love with this hotel. This hotel is his home and everything. And after a series of unfortunate events, he might need to let this place go. And the next book is Where Sleeping Girls Lie, and this book is coming out on March 19th, and this book is a mystery thriller, a YA mystery thriller from the author of Ace of Spades, and I never read that book. Honestly, it didn't sound very interesting to me, but I know that people who read that book, they love that book. The premise of this book, in my humble opinion, actually sounds way better than Ace of Spades. In this book, our main protagonist is Sadeh Hussein, and she has been homeschooled her entire life, and then now suddenly she has to enroll into this boarding school called the Alfred Nobel Academy, and obviously she doesn't really find her place there, and then after the first night her roommate just disappears, and people, because she is weird to these people, they think that she has something to do with it. And then Sadeh catches the eyes of the most popular girls in school, and I think they are called the Unholy Trinity, and as Sadeh starts investigating, she realizes that there is more to this boarding school that meets the eye. And the next book is How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin, and this book is coming out on March 26th, and this is a mystery book, and the Goodreads description said that this book is for the fans of Knives Out. So I loved Knives Out, I am more than happy to give this book a chance because the description sounds really, really good. In 1965, a teenager, Frances, goes to a fortune teller. And the fortune teller tells her that, Frances, you are going to die. You are going to be murdered. And obviously, Frances freaks out. I totally get it. And she spends her entire life trying to solve this crime. She gathers dirt about her family members, about her friends. She just, again, understandably, she doesn't want to be murdered. But then 60 years later, she is murdered. And when she's found dead, her niece, Annie, is desperate to find the killer. But who is the killer? And is her own life at danger? And then the next book that I put on my list is The Good, the Bad, and the Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto. And I think that this book is the third book in the Aunties mystery series. And I have not read any of the books in this mystery series, but I heard that it's more like a comedy mystery series. But from the information that I gathered, people really like this book. So again, if you are interested in the sequel, then mark the date. It is March 26. And then the last book for March is another science fiction, Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And this is coming out on March 28. And I mean, we all know that Adrian Tchaikovsky, he's like an epic and high sci-fi writer, and this book is supposed to be a sci-fi standalone from him. The planet of Klin, probably that's how we pronounce it, it is a prison colony for Earth, and when Earth decides to send prisoners there, it's a one-way trip. They usually don't come back to Earth. And then one political dissident, a professor, what's his name? Arton Dugdev. It's a name I am not going to remember. He is a xenoecologist and, just like I said, a political dissident. And when he's sent to this planet, he realizes that humanity, or humans, were not the first intelligent life of this planet. There are remains of civilization, and he is determined to find out that why are the ruins there? What happened? Where is this intelligent race and where did they go? Okay, the first book in April is Powerful by Lauren Roberts, and this is coming out on April 1st. And this is just a short story in the fantasy romance series Powerless. I've never read any of the books, but again, if you are interested in this series, then mark the date because this short story is coming out on April 1st. And the next book on my list for April is One of You by Erin E. Adams, and this is a book that's also coming out on April 1st, and this is a thriller / horror novel, and this is how the Goodreads description starts. I want to read this up to you. What would you sacrifice to become American? I was like, is this immigration discussed in this book? And this is a thriller, and this is a horror, and there are paranormal elements to it? Sign me up! A Haitian family immigrated to New York years ago, you know, establishing their lives there and building their lives there. And when the matriarch of the family dies, then the two daughters, Judith and Beatrice, they are left to deal with the funeral and the guests and, you know, with everything, all the aftermath. And then they meet Liberté, and I'm guessing I'm pronouncing that correctly. And while Liberté knows everything about them, and she claims that she is a very good friend of their mother's, they know nothing about her, and then strange things start happening. There is a disfigured doll that appears in the attic. Childhood photos are disappearing, and then suddenly their father becomes really ill. So then Judith and Beatrice, they need to start investigating, and they need to understand if Liberté has any role in what's happening to their family. April 1st, sign me up. And also, sign me up for the next book. the next book just for the summer by Abby Jimenez, and this is coming out on April 2nd, and this is a romance book, an Abby Jimenez romance book. And look, I never read anything from her, but I know the hype that surrounds her books, and honestly I think it's legit. And reading this description, this is the first book that I want to pick up from her, and you know what? I am probably picking this book up on April 2nd. Our male protagonist, Justin, has a curse, because it seems like that whenever he enters a relationship, once they break up, the lady just goes on and finds the love of her life immediately after breaking up with Justin. This is like super unfair, right? And then Emma, our female main protagonist, she seems to have the same problem. So she slides into Justin's DM and they make a deal that they will be dating each other during the summer, only that 3 months, and they think that their curses will cancel out each other. And when they break up, they will go have their separate lives and find the love of their lives. And it is supposed to be just a summer fling, but I think we all know that that's not what's going to happen, and I cannot wait to finally read an Abby Jimenez book. And the next book on my list for April, and honestly, April is the month that looks like absolutely crazy. The best books are coming out in April. And this one, A Short Walk Through a Wide World. This is also something that's coming out on April 2nd. And this is a fantasy, and this is a debut novel. And this book is recommended to everybody who loved The Invisible Life of Eddie LaRue. It is Paris, 1885, and our protagonist, Aubrey, she's a 19-year-old girl, and she stumbles upon a wooden puzzle. But she doesn't really want to deal with it. She doesn't care for it. And then she just throws this wooden puzzle thingy away. But then in the evening, she finds this puzzle box in her bag. And the same evening, something happens. And at the dinner table, she starts bleeding to death, basically. And nobody understands what is happening. And all the medical treatments that they are trying to give her, it seems that just making her situation worse. And then she figures out that if she keeps moving from town to town, city to city, that somehow she is able to outrun her disease. So she begins this lifelong journey of running, and she is not able to stay in a town or in one place for a long time. Otherwise, she dies. So I understand why it is compared to The Invisible Life of Eddie LaRue. I cannot wait for this book to get published, and it seems like that I am picking up a couple of books on April 2nd. And the next book on my list is Lake of Souls, and this is a short story collection, a fantasy, sci-fi, speculative fiction short story collection by Anne Leckie. I never read anything from her, but I know her name and I know that she is a big author in the genre, and I think that I will start discovering her work by reading this short story collection. And the next book on my list is Nosy Neighbors by Freya Sampson, and this is also something that's coming out on April 2nd, and this is a mystery book, and this just sounds so good. This book is about two neighbors, a 25-year-old cat and 77-year-old Dorothy, and they just don't seem eye to eye. They live in the same building, they are neighbors, and cat seems to be the sunshine, and then Dorothy, like, you know, she's 77 years old, she seems to be the grump, and they have to come together to solve a murder. Because the police doesn't get. I mean, come on. And then the next book is Bless Your Heart by Lindy Ryan, and I think that this book is coming out on April 9th, and this book is like advertised. It's kind of like a funny horror book, but no. Goodreads is not going to fool me again. They did it with Suburban Hell, because Suburban Hell was also sold to me as kind of like a very humorous horror novel. like, you know, something like Grady Hendrix style, and it wasn't. It creeped me out, so I am going to be very careful with this one. We are in this book in Southeast Texas, and the Evans woman, they are a family and they run a funeral home, and you know, it's like it's serious business, but nothing special. People unfortunately die and they bury them until one day the town gossip Mina, when she dies, she is transported to the funeral home, but then she wakes up. She wakes up, and it turns out that the original vampires named the Strigoi are back in town. The next book on my list is, I know that this is a crazy famous book already, The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This is coming out on April 9th. This is going to be my first Leigh Bardugo book. I never read anything else from her. And this is a standalone, so this will be perfect for me. And apparently, and I don't know if this is true or not because I don't remember where I found this information, but with this book she is also discovering some of her own personal family history and ancestry, and that just sounds so interesting to me. And this fantasy book is more like a historical fantasy book that takes place in Madrid during the Golden Age. And apparently the Spanish king, he never really recovered from losing the war with Elizabeth I, like, you know, when the Spanish Armada was basically destroyed, and he will use Lucia. I think that that's how you pronounce her name. She is our female protagonist who has some kind of magic. He wants to use Lucia as an advantage in the upcoming war that he wants to have with Elizabeth. And I want to read this sentence to you from Goodreads because I think that it's such a catchy sentence. Lucia plunges into a world of seers and alchemists, holy men and hucksters, where the line between magic, science, and fraud is never certain. This sounds so good. And the next book on my list is How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kuang. I am sorry if I am pronouncing that wrong. This book is coming out on April 9th, and this is a romance book from a debut author, because Yulin Kuang is a debut author, but she has been working as a screenwriter with Emily Henry, and I think that she is the screenwriter or the director for Beach Read, the movie, the upcoming movie. And this book is about Helen and Grant, and they had an accident 13 years ago that changed their lives, and they are both still suffering from PTSD, but one of them lives in the East Coast and then the other one lives in the West Coast. And Helen is now a best-selling author, and she has a book that is becoming a TV show, so she needs to travel to LA, and guess who is going to be the screenwriter of her upcoming TV show? Of course, it will be Grant. And now they have to come together, they have to work together, and there is that big question. Is their story a love story? Was it ever meant to be a love story? Sign me up. And now we are taking a 180 turn. The next book on my list is Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. And this is also coming out on April 9th. And this is a horror book, a space horror. She is the author of Dead Silence. Yeah, that was the title of the book. And again, I never read that book, but I really want to, because the premise for that book and also for this book is just sounds so good. The protagonist of this story is a psychologist, Dr. Ophelia Bray, who has dedicated her life to understand and to cure a disease that is a disease that's associated with space that apparently makes humans go cuckoo and they start murdering each other. For an investigation, she is assigned a small crew and they have to go to an abandoned planet to investigate. And when they arrive there, Ophelia realizes that while she is trying to do her research on the disease, maybe the other crew members have other motives. And then, one by one, they start popping up dead. Is it the space disease? Is this disease targeting them, or is there something else that's happening? Something sinister that's got nothing to do with any medical conditions. Sign me up. And the next book on my list is One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole, and this is coming out on April 16th, and this is also like a mystery slash thriller. To me, it sounds like a thriller, so that's how I am going to put it on my list. The protagonist of this story is Ken. Ken, who years ago had a mental breakdown, and she was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. But she got a second chance from life, and she is now the caretaker of a historical home on the Hudson River? No, there is no home on the Hudson River. What are you talking about, Zsuzsi? There are no houses on the Hudson River. I think it takes place in New York. And then she receives visitors from the Conservation Trust. And among these visitors, among these strangers, is a man who apparently destroyed her life years ago. And as Northeastern hits, they all get trapped in this house. And then boom, the guy dies. Somebody murdered that guy, and of course everybody believes that it is Ken. So now Ken and her alters, they need to come together and prove her innocence. I think this sounds so good. And the next book on my list is Funny Story by Emily Henry. The newest Emily Henry that is coming out on April 23rd. The description for this book just sounds so good. It's so twisted. This book, I will try to explain this, but this is like, it's crazy. I'm not sure that I understand what this book is about. But this book starts out with Daphne and Peter. They are like a couple, and Daphne is in love with Peter, but then it turns out, and apparently they are engaged, but then it turns out that Peter is not in love with Daphne anymore. He is in love with his childhood best friend Petra, but Petra was also engaged. Then Daphne and Petra's ex Miles, they also come together and they start like kind of like a fake dating relationship just to show to the world that they are completely fine. And I guess we all know where this is going. They are going to somehow end up together. And I described that premise without help from my notes, so yay! And the next book on the list is Reckless Hearts? Stars. Reckless Stars, the newest book in the Zodiac Academy series. I think that this is book number 9, and the author is Caroline Peckham, I believe. Never read any of the books, but I know that this is a very famous fantasy romance series. So again, I'm just putting it out there. If you are interested, mark the date. It is coming out on April 23rd. Okay, and now we made it to the first Regency romance era book on my list, and that is Earl's Trip by Jenny Holiday, and this is also something that's coming out on April 23rd, and we all know that I love these Regency era romances, right? So of course I am picking this book up as soon as I can. Okay, so we have 3 Earls in this story, and they are childhood best friends, and each year they go on an annual trip. So, you know, Earl's Trip, it's kind of just like girls' trip, but for Earls. And everything is summery and peachy and everything is fine. They are on their trip when Archie, our main Earl, main Earl? He receives a letter from a family friend, and that family friend is asking him for help because his childhood friend Olive needs to be rescued from an elopement. And Olive's sister, Clementine, who is against marriage and she wants to be a spinster for life, she's like freaking out, and ultimately Archie has to save Olive from Clementine. Like, basically that's the gist of the story. And as they develop their relationship, Clementine makes a very unusual request. Before she enters spinsterhood, she wants Archie to show her the art of the bedroom, and because he's a gentleman, of course he's not going to say no. At least I hope that he's not going to say no, because then there's no book. And the next book on my list is Happy Medium by Sarah Adler, and this is coming out on April 30th, I believe, and this is a romance. And I put this book on my list because it sounds so good. The female protagonist in this book is Gretchen, and Gretchen is kind of like a fake spiritualist. Oops, I ran out of battery, which is no surprise because I've been filming for like 2 hours now. Let's get back to the list and let's get back to Happy Medium. So, Gretchen cleanses houses for money from spirits, and then Charlie, our male protagonist, he needs her help, but Charlie doesn't believe Gretchen. She is a fraud, he knows that, and I mean, she is, so you know he's right. Until Gretchen actually finds herself face to face with a ghost. But this ghost is trying to help Charlie because apparently there is a curse on his house or on his barn, and this ghost is trying to prevent Charlie getting in trouble. And the last book that I have on my list for April is Home Where the Buddies Are by Ginevra Rose, and this is coming out on April 30th, and this is also a thriller book, but to me it sounds more like a horror kind of book. After their mother dies, three estranged sisters, they have to come together to deal with their inheritance and to deal with the house. And they decide just, you know, it's like one final thing to do, watch very old home videos that their parents made. And they stumble upon this one home video that is with their dad and mother, and no, don't get any ideas. No, this is not about that. On this home video, Daddy actually appears like drenched in blood with a body. And on this tape, their parents make a deal that they get rid of the body and they will never talk about this again. And then the tape just ends. And now the sisters have a decision to make. Are they going to just like, you know, let this murder, possible murder in the past, or are they going to investigate? And I don't have to tell you that they are going to investigate. Okay, now the May books. May starts out good because on May 7th, the newest release, book 6 in the Lore Olympus series, is coming out by Rachel Smithy, and I am smitten. See that? Smitten by this graphic novel series, and oh my god, I just love it so much. So May 7th is definitely on my calendar. I am reading this graphic novel. If you don't know what this is about, this is kind of like a contemporary style retelling of Hades and Persephone and their love story, and I just love it. I love it. And also on May 7th, the newest book in the From Blood and Ash series, or the sequel, no, the prequel to the From Blood and Ash series is coming out, From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and I believe that this is the last book in the prequel. This is book 4. And the next book that is coming out the same day, May 7th, this book sounds so good, and probably this is the sci-fi book on this list that I am the most interested in, and that is The Ministry of Time. And this book is described as a sci-fi, but it is also described as a romance, a time traveler romance. Also, it is a workplace comedy and also a spy thriller. I'm like, okay, I'm here for it. Sign me up. Sounds so good. In the near future, the government ministry is gathering expats from different times. So basically from throughout history. And our female protagonist is tasked to be a bridge. And basically that means that she has to look after, take care of, and assist an expat from the past, Graham, Commander Graham, who died on an 1845 expedition to the Arctic. And now he just doesn't know what the hell is happening because he is in the future and he is living with an unmarried woman. And the woman shows her ankles and her calves all the time. And he's like super confused. What the hell? Now, I think that we all know how this is going to end because these very uncomfortable housemates, they are obviously going to fall in love. I expect a lot of banter from this book, and that is what I like. And the next book on my list is My Dreadful Darling Thing by Joanna von Veen, and this is a book that's coming out on May 14th, and this is a horror book. The main protagonist in this book is Ruth, and Ruth can see ghosts, and Ruth's mother is kind of like in the ghost business, in the seance business, and a super wealthy widow, Agnes, visits them and asks them for help. So Ruth moves in with Agnes in this very unsettling manor house. And then someone ends up dead and everybody is convinced that Ruth did it. Obviously, she knows that she didn't do it, and she can also see ghosts and talk to ghosts, and the ghosts could possibly help her, proving her innocence. But then everybody just thinks that Ruth is cuckoo because no, ghosts are not real. So they task this psychologist, Dr. Montagu, who is supposed to figure it out if Ruth is just crazy or she's like truly innocent. It kind of feels like that Ruth is going to be a very unreliable narrator. Like we the readers won't be able to tell if she truly sees ghosts or she just lives in her own fantasy world. And this sounds very interesting to me. And the next book on my list is Love at First Book by Jan McKinley, and this is coming out on May 14th, and this is a romance book. And why am I interested in this book, you ask? Well, let me tell you. The protagonist of this book is Emily, and Emily is a librarian and she lives in Martha's Vineyard. Hello, Massachusetts. I've never been to Martha's Vineyard, but still, it's like still Massachusetts, okay? And her favorite author needs her help specifically to finish her series. So she decides to move to Ireland. Ireland? I love Ireland. If you've never been to Ireland, then you're missing out on this, and you're missing out on this, and you're missing out on this. So go to Ireland. That is the message of this video. Go to Scotland and go to Ireland, okay? But when she arrives there, she has to deal with the author's son, Kieran, who is running a bookstore, and he is super grumpy. So again, I guess that we all know where this is going. This is gonna be a grumpy sunshine romance story taking place in Ireland, so I cannot wait to read it. The next book on my list is She Left by Stacey Gray, and this is also coming out on May 14th, and this is a thriller book. 20 years ago, Amy, our female protagonist, she walked out of a house party. She had a fight with her friends. She never really fit with her friends, so she just decided to leave. But then hours later, her friends were found dead, unalived. And now, 20 years later, 10 people who are somehow connected to this murder are invited to a remote cliffside house. And for some reason, they decide to go. I mean, if I got an invitation like that, I wouldn't go. Honestly, I would just stay at home, but Amy decides to go. And then, as a storm is brewing and the storm starts isolating them from the outer world, they realize that someone knows a little bit more about the murder that happened 20 years ago. Who is that? What happened? And are they going to survive this trip? And the next book on my list is the newest Veronica Roth release. What's the title? When a Monk Crows. And this is also coming out on May 14th, and obviously this is a fantasy book. Our male protagonist is Dimitri, and Dimitri is a fighter who is able to kill monsters. He's able to cleave his body in half, like technically his spine in half, and that will be his sword, and that's how he slays monsters. And our female protagonist is Ala, who is carrying a family curse, and she obviously wants to get rid of this curse. So Dimitri and Ala, they make a bargain that Ala will help Dimitri find a witch, Baba Yaga, and then in return Dimitri will save Ala from this curse using an enchanted flower, but they only have 24 hours, because in 24 hours this flower is going to be dead. And the next book on my list is The House That Horror Built by Christina Henry, and this is also something that's coming out on May 14th, and obviously, you know, just guessing by the title, it is a horror book. The protagonist of this book is Harry, who's always been obsessed with horror movies, and she is the cleaning lady or the cleaner of the house that belongs to this insanely famous horror movie director, and he lives in that house, and this house is full with like costumes and movie props and all that. But Harry loves her job and she's very unbothered by this. And then one day she starts hearing noise and sounds from a room that's got a closed door, and she actually hears somebody asking for help. But then how and why? Because this horror movie director, he doesn't like guests. He doesn't have guests. So what is happening? And the next book on my list is The Guncle Abroad by Stephen Rowley, and this is coming out on May 21st, and this is the second book in the series, the Guncle series. It is literary fiction, and I read The Guncle from this author, and I also read Lily and the Octopus from this author, and oh my god, his books, honestly, they always hit hard. They are so well written and they are so funny, but they are also full of heart. And honestly, I cannot wait to read The Guncle Abroad because I really love the first book in the series. And the next book on my list is also a science fiction book, The Lost Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Thornton, and this is coming out on May 21st. In this book, we live in a world where a poisonous fog, basically destroyed everything and killed humanity. But there is this island, and there are 122 villagers and 3 scientists who are living on this island, and they are very content with their lives. It's actually kind of weird because it is the scientists who are telling the villagers what to do, but they are happy. And then one day, one of the scientists, their beloved scientists, turn up dead. And that's not enough that the scientist is dead. Somebody actually started lowering down the security field around the island that is protecting them from this fog. And also, the security system somehow wiped everybody's memory. So they have to find the murderer if they don't want to die, because somehow they need to raise the shields back up. But they don't know who is the murderer. So this sounds so interesting to me. And then the next book on my list, it is one of my anticipated books for spring. It is The Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel, and this is coming out on May 21st. And this book is the feminist retelling of the story of Ganga, who is the goddess of the river, because this author, she writes all these like feminist Indian myth retellings, and I loved Kaikei, so I cannot wait to get to this book. And the next book on my list is You Like It Darker by Stephen King. This is also something that's coming out on May 21st. This is a short story collection from him, and apparently it's a collection of old short stories that he has already published. Well, I never read them, but this book also has new short stories. And the next book on my list is Looking for Love in All the Haunted Places by Claire Kahn. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And this is a book that is coming out on May 21st. And this is a romance book. And you probably know about this author because she wrote The Romantic Agenda. And that book was not really one of my favorites, but I understand why that book was so important to so many people and that so many people felt seen by that book, and I respect that. It was just not really, I didn't really like it. But this book, the premise for this book, it sounds so good. This book is about Lucky. Lucky, who has an affinity to the supernatural, but unfortunately nobody really takes parapsychology seriously. Her family doesn't take her seriously, her friends don't take her seriously. And then her big break comes when she gets an insider info about a production company. Because every single actor on this show quits after spending 3 nights in this infamous Victorian house, the Hennessy house. And then she goes there to investigate, and she meets there with Maverick, and the chemistry between the two characters, it's palpable to everybody, including Hennessy House. And Hennessy House wants attention. Honestly, like, this sounds so good. If this premise doesn't intrigue you, then I have no idea what does. And the next book on my list is Evocation by S.T. Gibson. And this book is coming out on May 28th. Now, this is a fantasy book from the author of The Dowry of Blood, and I never read that book. It is on my TBR. I want to read that book. I've just never really gotten the chance or the time to read that book, but it is a YouTube darling, and you know, everybody who reads it seems to love it, so I definitely want to give it a try. This book sounds so good because it's not enough that it's fantasy. It also takes place in Boston. I mean, come on. And this book is about David Aristarchov, and he has an everyday job as a Boston attorney, but he's also a psychic, and he works as a medium to this secret society. But apparently, every power comes with a price, and the devil has come to collect the debt. And the last book on my list, because yes, people, we have reached the end of this list and the end of this video. That is All Is Fair in Love and War by Virginia Heath. And this is a book that is also coming out on May 28th. And this book sounds so good. This is a romance, a Regency era romance that somehow reminds me of The Sound of Music, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. The male protagonist in this book is Henry, and Henry is a naval captain, and he's very busy, and he likes everything in order. And when his sister decides to accompany her husband to Egypt, she leaves her three kids, with her brother. And Henry has absolutely no idea what to do with these 3 unruly kids. So he hires an emergency governess, Georgina, to keep everything in order. But Georgina believes that childhood should be filled with mischief and adventure and laughter. So I guess now you understand why I am comparing this book to The Sound of Music. Well guys, this is it. This is the end of the video. Wow, this was a long one. Oh my god, I've been filming for like 3.5 hours. Wow, I seriously will need to edit this video down. I am so thirsty, I am parched, but it was worth it. It was worth it. I hope that you found at least one 5 or 10 or 50 books on this list that you are interested in, definitely let me know in the comments down below. And also let me know if I forgot or I didn't find any like super interesting book that is coming out in the spring. If you made it this far in this video, thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. Hit share, like, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. You are welcome here. I have so many fun projects coming up in the spring that I am working on. And in the meantime, if you want to check out any of my other videos, I will leave them on the screen, probably here and here. And I'll see you soon in an upcoming video. Bye!